you remember the news in Norway, was a killing in 2011, July 2011. And news broke out, this a huge, well, young people were killed on one of the islands. There was a lot of uproar. And the first impression was given, and also in the news, this must have been Islamic terrorists. It turned out, of course, after not too long, I think waited about a day or maybe less than a day, at least globally, that the perpetrator was not a Muslim, but a Norwegian, Anders Breivik. And he was identified as a Christian. And immediately the media began to speculate, saying, well, no, this cannot really be a real Christian. He must have been only a cultural Christian. And people were in the view saying, well, no, we know Andres, and he has actually, yes, he was a cultural Christian. He went to church as a youth, but he has left going to church nowadays. And by the way, people said, he couldn't have been a Christian, because how a born-again Christian cannot do this. And I think this is interesting, because whenever a Muslim, or I hear about Islamic people doing this kind of thing, this kind of courtesy is not given to them. We immediately begin to say, oh yeah, sure, I could see it coming. It's kind of a normal thing, because we expect people from Islamic background doing that kind of thing. So that is, I think, the biblical Jesus tells us, do unto others what you would like others to do unto you. And maybe this is one of the things we should be taking into consideration. A lot of people consider Islam being violent. I'm just quoting a few people. This is one of my countrymen who said, the reason why we must reject Islam is exactly Islam's violent nature. We believe in democracy. We fight with the focus of our conviction, but we never use violence. Other people say, well, Islam is intolerant. I think Christianity is an attitude of freedom, of recognizing different meanings of tolerance. Islam has nothing to do with tolerance. That's what the guy from the Swiss party said. Other people say, well, Islam is anti-democratic. The introduction of Sharia, of Islamic law, is only the first phase. Secondly, Muslims will demand that Sharia law becomes part of our civil code, and at the end there is only Sharia. The holy war, jihad, against the Western enemy is a duty for every Muslim. This was a quote from the leader of the Flemish Interest Party. Some of these parties and the extreme right-wing parties have gained some election. They won some of our elections last week and this weekend. So this kind of thinking is happening around Europe. Islam is considered any woman. A guy from Germany, from Austria actually, he's not alive anymore, but he said human rights and democracy are as incompatible with the Muslim religious doctrine as is the equality of women. In other words, it doesn't fit. So that's the kind of ideas and thinking that has been and is going around in Europe. And it would help us, I think, as Christians to say, well, we maybe should not focus on Islam as a religion, but focus on Muslims. One of my countrymen, who is died already a long time ago, but he said, I'm never in contact with Islam, but with Muslims and his Mohammedanism. That was the word used for Muslims then. It's not being used anymore. So I'm never in contact with Islam, but I'm only in contact with the Muslim and his Islam. And I think it's important for us to understand this. Islam is often considered as an abstract ideology or religion or something that we can, it's essentialized, we say, okay, we can make a definition of it, we can fit it into a box, but unfortunately you cannot drink tea with Islam, you cannot rub shoulders with Islam, you cannot have a conversation with Islam. I mean, it doesn't work like that. You can have a conversation with Muslims, you can have a conversation or drink coffee or tea with Muslims. And I think it would help us as Christians to look beyond the abstract thing of Islam and look into how Islam is being expressed in daily life, in the lives of Muslims. The life Islam, instead of an essentialized Islam. So what we actually need is a new set of glasses. We need to look at the situation from different angles. I mean, if you are blind and you were asked to describe an elephant, say, well, it depends on where you are. That you say, well, no, I think an elephant is a spear, if you happen to be on the front side. Or you can say, no, it's a snake, if you happen to touch some of the toes or something else. Or a tree, or a wall, it's a rope, if you happen to have touched the tail. Depends on where you're at, that is what you define the animal to be. And sometimes that's how we define Islam. We look at saying, well, I know how Islam is because I have now this thing in my hands and I've studied this book. I think this is all what Islam is. I think, well, maybe this is just one aspect of what Islam is like. You may be mistaken. In this picture, can you see it from there? You can actually identify 9 people that are in one picture, if you look very closely. I mean, some are obvious. This is a lady here. See where she carries a baby, so that's 2. This is a man here, of course the man himself here. There is a face here, see? Going around, there's another face going over here. There's a face over here, there's one over here. So there are 9 people hidden in one picture, but you really have to look closely to actually see it. You have to really pay good attention to see the nuances, to see the differences. Like this, I will show you this picture. You say, well, what do you see? Some people say, well, I see an old woman. Others say, no, I see a young woman. Or some people like this picture, they say, I see a horse, and they see a horse. But if you put it like this, it's no longer a horse, but a frog. So a horse has become a frog. That can happen. Well, it doesn't happen in reality, but I mean, that's sometimes how things are perceived. Or this one. You look and you see, I see a guy who's playing a saxophone or one of the music instruments. Or one of them say, no, I see a woman there. I see a face. So there are different ways of sometimes looking at the reality. Here you see a face of a person. But if you turn it around, you see the words liar. So the face of a person becomes a liar. Well, sometimes you think, well, yes, the person is a liar. But you have all these kind of, or this one, what do you see? What do you see? A rabbit? Yes. And what else? If you look at a duck. So the rabbit, when the ears or the beak of a duck. So these kind of things sometimes, when it comes to looking at Islam, some of these same things can happen to us. If you are from Australia, is anyone from Australia? No. This is the world map from Australia. It looks slightly different. It's the same world, but their perception of the world is different. Of course, because what seems to be not logic for us is not quite logic for them. So sometimes we need to change our perceptions. We need to change the way of looking at things. And that is easier to do when we look at Muslims instead of looking at Islam. So when Muslims came into Europe, and some have come in the 1960s, in some parts of Europe, Muslims have been there since the Ottoman Empire, and like in the Balkans, after the changeover in these countries, they became alive again. They were persecuted, they became nominal, and there's a lot of reviving going on in the eastern part of Europe when it comes to Islam. And in the western part of Europe, we have Muslims coming. They were invited to come because we needed their hands to work in our factories and also other places. Nowadays we have refugees coming who want to flee their countries, coming to safety in Europe. So people are, and gradually they are beginning to find their place in Europe. Like I said, the first generation North Africans and Turks in Germany and the Netherlands and France and Belgium, they were first generation men. They came by themselves. Families were still back home. They came, they didn't have many facilities, there were no mosques, there were no Islamic butchers and all kind of stuff. So gradually these things became part of our societies, and they became part of our societies. The children grew up in our schools, and this has enormous implications also for the way they experience their religion. Their religion is changing, the way they express it, the way they formulate it, the way they describe it. There are many Muslims across Europe that are still Muslims. If you ask them, who are you? They would say, I'm a Muslim. But they no longer practice in the way that their parents used to do. They never go to a mosque, except on special occasions. They never read the Qur'an. They may fast, because fasting is kind of a social gathering, which I find a lot of Muslims do, even if they have no daily religious life, so to speak. According to some statistics, between 30 and 40% of Muslims in Europe are really practicing their faith to the letter, so to speak. They're practicing the old, what we call, say, okay, they do this and this and this, between 30 and 40%. The rest, they are scattered through different ways, and I will explain some of those. So in order to understand what Islam is, one has to stop talking about a single Islam as a stereotype. Think of a palette on which painters put all the colors they are going to use. I would suggest that Islam, like Christianity, has many different colors on its palette. And I just gave a picture of, this is actually from the Netherlands. Here it says, we cannot make it more cozy. This talks about drink a cup of tea in the mosque. This is about a herring. It's kind of the fish we eat in the Netherlands. I eat them raw, and this is reading a newspaper. So just as it's kind of a way of expressing Islam has become part of our society. So I want to give you a brief overview of some of the expressions of Islam, some of the doors, if you want, of the Islamic house in Europe that have been developing in the last few years. I do them in alphabetical order. So the fact that I started with angry Muslims doesn't necessarily mean they are the largest group, but it's alphabetical. But of course, this group gets the most attention. It's the kind of the radicals, the ones that cause troubles in our continent. This is an example. He's a German, actually converted to Islam. A lot of those angry Muslims are actually converts. Europeans that have converted to Islam. If the brothers would buy one doner kebab less a week, we could buy almost 20 sniper bullets to fight the kufr, the infidels. So that's a young guy who says this. So not buy less doner so that we can buy bullets to fight in Syria. There are at the moment around 2,000 European Muslims fighting in Syria. So some of those Muslims are so angry. They're not always angry with Christians. There may be some. But some are angry with other Muslims. Or angry with the way Muslims express Islam. Other words that are being used for these kind of people, Wahhabis, Salafis, radical Muslims, different words are being used. They are fundamentalists in a sense, although I have put them in a different category, because not all fundamentalists are radical Muslims in a sense. These kind of Muslims renounce modern society. They don't like democracy. In fact, they are very against democracy. They don't like the modern way of, they want to go back to the source, to Muhammad and his followers, and try to copy his life as much as they can. Hard to tell how many of these Muslims there are in Europe. Average, I would think, certainly less than 1% of all Muslims in Europe would fit this category. Of course, you need not many to actually cause a lot of trouble. as we know. I mean, there have been bomb attacks in Madrid, in London. The people that flew into the World Trade Center had been living in Hamburg for a while. So, I mean, you only need one or two to cause a lot of uproar and trouble in our nations. But there are a few. And these people are closely watched by our governments and secret services, and also sometimes very hard to control. Even the mosques have problems to find them, to know, because usually these people withdraw from the mosque as soon as they become more inward-looking, they find their resources from the internet. That's a very strong thing. So that are the angry Muslims. Then we go to the next category, which I would call the converted Muslims. Muslims, people that grew up as a Christian or whatever, and converted one point in their life, converted to Christianity. This is Cat Stevens, probably one of the most well-known and actually very influential converted Muslim. Use of Islam is his new name, Cat Stevens, is his old name. And he gives a reason. I found a religion that blended scientific reason with spiritual reality in a unifying faith, far removed from the headlines of violence, destruction, and terrorism. According to some of the researchers, there are this group of people, this kind of Muslims would be about 1% of all Muslims in Europe. It means in Germany, for instance, 17,000 Germans have converted to Islam. And some statistics say about 4,000 every year convert. 4,000 every year convert from whatever they believed in to Islam in their life. In England, again, they say about 5,200 every year. In Rome, Italy, there's just estimate about between 15 and 20,000 altogether in Italy. In Paris, in 1 year, 4,000 converts. In the Netherlands, the number of converts is about 2,000. And in Spain, the number is estimated to be 20,000. So although it is only 1%, it's still 1% of about 50 million. It's still quite a group of people, of course. Why do they convert? Various reasons, which I won't have time to go into, but I'll just list them. It's just for your information. Spiritual poverty. They felt spiritually poor, so they found richness in Islam. They were curious in Islam. They said, unlike Christianity, Islam makes sense to me. Other people say Islam is in agreement with modern science. In fact, I visited a mosque some weeks ago, and this was we asked the guy leading us around, one of the leaders of the mosque, why he was a Muslim. And he said, well, it's because Islam is really in agreement with modern science. And he quoted some verses from the Qur'an. He said, the Qur'an says this and this about the world, and even before the scientific discoverment have been taken place, Qur'an already talked about this. So that for him was a very attractive point. Other reasons people give is Islam is an egalitarian religion, blind to the racial prejudices so common to Western culture. Kind of interesting that this is a reason for them to convert, because it's exactly the reason why we would say, well, that's the reason why we would not consider Islam an egalitarian religion, but they actually did. Other reasons given are, one betters himself upon embracing Islam, actually became morally a better person. He says, influence of other Muslims, and also marriage. So some of the reasons that they are given to actually convert. And this is something that we as a church, also our young people, are getting under the influence. There's an option now to actually become a Muslim, which was not an option 20 years ago. I mean, of course it was, but now it's making it easier. Muslims are evangelizing, in their way at least, in our cities and our villages. So our young people in our churches could actually be invited by a Muslim to actually come and speak to them and actually be attracted to it. Or it could be through a boyfriend or whatever that happens. Then we have what I call cool Muslims. Cool Muslims it's like Muslim youth culture. That's a new thing that it's under the radar for most of Christians. We don't look at this, we don't see this. But it's kind of a new development of youth culture Muslims expressing their way of religion in a new way. They combine Western forms with Islamic forms. And in a sense they are very conservative in their faith, but they are very modern in the way to express their faith. And I want to just give you some examples. Through music, for instance, there are all kinds of websites where you can go to and look at hip-hop, rap, different ways of expressing for them what it is to be a Muslim. I have a friend who is also singing beautiful songs about God. He's a Moroccan, and if you listen to some of his songs, you will think, wow, man, this guy could be a Christian. Make all the words he says. Sometimes have people listen to the songs, and they say, well, he's searching for God. He's talking about the purity of God and all this kind of stuff. Very interesting way of expressing Muslim faith. We have fashion, of course. Actually is a website called styleislam.com where you can actually order stuff, Islamic things. This is kind of, the Puma. Puma is kind of the sports brand. This is almost similar. It's called Juma, which is the Friday prayer. So they have actually used an existing brand and made it slightly different. So you have t-shirts, all kinds of things, headscarves in different colors and fashions that are being used. And also t-shirts saying, smile is sadaqah, a charity, it means in Arabic charity. Dieu est dit la vérité, God is trustworthy, God's word is trustworthy, or those kind of things. Then you have Muslims that have expressed their way of Islam and through arts and media. This is a graffiti in Birmingham, for instance, and talks about remember me, I will remember you. We have stand-up comedians, Muslims, and this is a funny guy from Denmark. People who equate Muslims with terrorists should be happy that Muslims don't drink. Drunken terrorists would be even worse. Yeah, so that's, but it's an interesting, and of course magazines, there are youth magazines being published, talking about, well, like we have Christian magazines for young people, they have Muslim magazines for young people, addressing issues that are of interest to Muslims. Youth camps, where they, like Christians, we have youth camps, young people going out to study the Bible, do fun things together. They have the same kind of stuff. I was in a mosque in Berlin some years ago, and at that weekend they had a young people gathering weekend. From young people from all over Germany came to Berlin to spend one weekend together, learning about Islam and doing fun things together. These things do happen, and we are. It was interesting to meet those guys. So then we move on to the next category, which are the critical Muslims. More and more, because Muslims are able to read the Qur'an and the sources for themselves, there is a growing category of Muslims who say, well, we are Muslims, of course, no doubt about that, but we will be looking at the interpretation of our sources in a more critical way. They're very critical of how, particularly some extremist Muslims have hijacked in their minds, hijacked Islam, and they want to take away this. They want to be very critical about how to express how Muslims are being expressed. And they say this is not a new thing. They say it actually goes back into the history of Islam. Although I have to admit, I find most Muslims not so self-critical. But this is a growing group of Muslims that are becoming critical about themselves, not just about others, but about themselves, and particularly about some of their leaders of the past. Actually, this is a magazine also that is being published, called Critical Muslims. And it's something that it's, again, growing very much. Then we have an interesting group called ex-Muslims. There are websites of ex-Muslims. They are not Christians, they're just ex-Muslims. They are, in different countries of Europe, you'll find these kind of websites. And they say, we have renounced religion. We are exmuslims.org in the UK. And you have them in France, you have them in Belgium, you have them in the Netherlands, all in Europe, in Austria, actually also now in Morocco. Brave people, Morocco. Brave people. And they have testimonies of why they are no longer Muslims. Very brave, faces sometimes there, names there, real names. And there are testimonies of why they actually left Islam. Interestingly enough, most of the people that leave Islam are men. You would think they are women, but they are men. And why do they leave Islam? The reasons, well, often are intellectual reasons, like the status of women, the contradiction between the Sharia and human rights, the problematic nature of the Qur'an, the character of the Prophet. Islam is illogical and unscientific, the eternal damnation of good non-Muslims, the unnecessary strict rules of Islam, the dubious historicity of the Qur'an and Hadith. These are some of the things that J. Smith tries to promote. So who knows? That maybe through some of his work, some of these people have actually come this far. But they don't just need J. Smith. I mean, there are other ways of God to bring this kind of thing in their lives. And of course, it doesn't mean they become Christians. Some other reasons are given: encounters with bad Muslims. Muslims have become oppressive. Muslims are, again, ill-treating women. So particularly the role of women has become one of the major factors for the men. Actually, it's interesting enough. The men leaving Islam because of the role Islam treats women. Very interesting. And you have websites where you actually can go to, and this is one of them, but there are more from different countries where they actually are very blunt and very bold. Then you have another category, which are the folk Muslims. I would say normal, everyday Muslims who are mixing pre-Islamic traditions with Islamic things, although some would say these are not Islamic things. It's plain that the beliefs, this is a quote from Bill Musk, that the beliefs and practices of ordinary Muslims contradict many formal aspects of Islamic faith. They permeate everyday life of human beings from Morocco to Malaysia, and also in Europe, of course. Rituals that to do with birth, with marriage, with funerals, amulets people wear around their neck, evil spells, evil spirits, all kinds of fertility rites. It's still taking place. Of course, particularly among the older generation in Europe, but also among the younger people. It still happens. And we would say, well, most of these things are occultic background. I think they are, absolutely. But for many Muslims, these are just part of Islamic tradition. They do not see a distinction between culture and religion. This is just part of Islam. Of course, Islamic scholars say, well, this is not part of Islam, but anyway, that's their problem. Then we have fundamentalist Muslims. So they are not the angry Muslims, they are fundamentalist Muslims. They are Puritans, you can say. Those that want to live to the Quran according to the letter, not use violence, but just take it seriously. But they do want to create a caliphate. It's where one of the caliphs, Islamic leader, rules the world, so to speak. It's their dream. If God can rule the world, it would be heaven on earth. Well, I agree. We agree. Of course. I had a talk with a Muslim not too long ago, and he said, yes, God will rule the world, and that will be, this is theocracy, this is the best. So yes, I fully agree, this is the best. But God doesn't need our help to make it happen. He can do it by himself. That's where the problem starts. We want to help God to be the boss of this world. Usually we become the boss of the world. But these kind of fundamentalist Muslims are there very active also. And you can find them in different shapes and forms, different groups of people. Fundamentalists that are sometimes also like Jehovah's Witnesses, going around the door to door, expressing their Islam and trying to win people to Islam. Then we have liberal Muslims. The claim of the present generation, this is a quote from Iqbal. He was actually one of the founders of the country of Pakistan. the claim of the present generation Muslim liberals to reinterpret the foundational legal principles in the light of their own experience and the altered conditions of modern life is, in my opinion, perfectly justified. It's not quite so in Pakistan right now, I guess, but at that time, these liberal Muslims, they are opposed to theocracy, so they don't believe in theocracy. According to the other ones, they did, but these people do not. They want to guarantee the rights of women and freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of change of religion. They have respect for the Qur'an, they have respect for Muhammad, but they re-evaluate all of this in light of modern life. They feel Islam or Qur'an is important, but they do not interpret it literally. And they have to look for the principles behind the words, so to speak, which is often what liberal Christians do anyway with the Bible. So it's a very similar development. They are critical of custom Islam, they're critical of all the extreme parties they find around, and they believe Islam is compatible with modernity. And they have people quite active in this, but there is not yet a liberal wing, officially at least. You find all these Muslims scattered around in Europe. They all still would go to a mosque, but you cannot say, well, this is really a liberal mosque, or this is a fundamentalistic mosque, or this is an angry mosque, or that kind of thing. You cannot find those kind of things yet. There's a lady who wrote a book called The Trouble with Islam Today. She's a Canadian Muslim, and she wants to develop actually Operation Ijtihad. Ijtihad is an Arabic word for self-interpretation of the Quran. Every Muslim can actually independent reasoning to find the meaning of the Quran, not because of what someone else said, but I can find it myself. It's a very modern individualistic interpretation. And you have those, in fact, quite a few of my Muslim friends, I would think, would fit this category of liberal Muslims. Mystical Muslims. Again, this is another group, Sufism, very popular in Europe among Muslims, because it easily mixes with other religions. New Age comes in, and it's really a mix. Sometimes actually the emphasis is really on union with God. This is like you have in mosques, some mosques, the Alevi mosques from Turkey, for instance. There's a dancing going on in the mosque. Actually, people going in trance, reciting the names of God. It's really trying to unite with God. That's their desire. They have some other religions or other traditions and so on. Very interesting group of people. Actually, I would say probably very close to us. They are far less legalistic than their Muslim brothers and sisters are in other parts of Europe. But again, this Sufi Islam really goes through a lot of the official Islamic traditions. And I think it's the reason for its popularity is it's because it meets a need. It seems to meet a need in the hearts of Muslims who are so stuck in legalism traditions, and they still nevertheless have a desire to unite with God. Well, this gives them a way, like poems. There are a lot of poems being read which express actually their desire to meet with God, which is actually a great desire. So in a sense, they come close to what we and would be open to the gospel. Then you have ordinary Muslims, of course. Yeah, there are lots of those. In fact, the majority of Muslims, I would say. I'm a Muslim, not a terrorist. People who are Muslims are influenced by all sorts of motivations. I think we easily put a label on someone who looks like a Moroccan or a Pakistani. He's a Muslim. Well, he may be a Muslim, but he also other things. He's also a husband, he's also a wife, or a father, or a mother, or a grandmother, or a doctor, or a nurse, but we have come in Europe so accustomed to now stick only the religious labels on the people that we forget that they are just normal beings, normal human beings. And we sometimes fail to see them as normal human beings. We are a Christian, but we are more than just a Christian. And that's true for Muslims as well, of course. Progressive Muslims. Sometimes these labels overlap a little bit. But it means not simply thinking more about the Quran and the life of the Prophet, but also thinking about the life we share on the planet. It's like I would say these are the humanists among the Muslims, who are very much into humanistic ways of expressing religion. Sometimes they're called enlightened rationalists or Islamic humanists. But again, among this group itself, there's a huge variety of opinions. They don't believe in. They believe in the separation of state and church. Again, they are very critical of reading the Quran literally. They desire gender equality. They really are very strong on social justice. They are also very strong on social reality. So they have among these group people that are very strong for gay rights and lesbian rights, actually within the mosques as well. So this kind of another kind of group of people, they are very, in that sense, progressive. They're not always liked, of course, you can imagine. I mean, one group may not like the other group. It happens quite a lot. It's not that it's all nice and peaceful. These are a lot of those associations of progressive Muslims in different parts of Europe. You see, you have them all. I just listed a few of them, and they are quite influential. Particularly women, it seems like, are very taken a very leading role in this particular group of Muslims. They have reformist Muslims, and this is just one example. Tariq Ramadan, a very influential intellectual in Europe, very popular among young, more intellectual young people, Muslims. He wants to reform Islamic law. So okay, let's keep the principles here, but we have to find new ways to expressing our religious principles. So do away with the outside shell, so to speak, but keep the content. Try to reformulate Islam in a new way. Again, he is not always liked very much. Even not among Christians, he's not liked, because some Christians feel he's a wolf in sheep clothes, because he says one thing to one group and he says another thing to something else. His father was a founder of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, so he said, well, see, if he is a son of the father, he cannot be trusted. He has written quite a few books, good books actually, I have to say. I like some of his writings. But there are people like him, other names, or people that are trying to create, they want to reshape theology, they want to reform Islamic theology in different ways. And again, this is not always appreciated by the majority of their fellow people, but certainly something that happens. Secular Muslims say, well, yeah, I'm still, this is a guy who says, I'm someone who is not really religious anymore. My worldview is not really informed by religious text, but I participate in traditional Muslim celebrations, like Eid, like going to the Sufi saints. So I mean, he goes through the motions, but he's really not. But if you would say you are no longer a Muslim, you would be offended. Say, no, of course I'm a Muslim, but for me, Islam is just a label which I basically can take and choose. It's a cultural identity, not a religious one. So that's a kind of the few of the shapes and forms that Islam is beginning to have, and there are probably more categories in the near future. One of my purposes in explaining this to Christians is to break down this stereotype of every Muslim in Europe is the same thing. Because when we know that Muslims are different and expressing Islam in a different way, it means our approach to reaching out to them has to be different. We cannot talk to the fundamentalist Muslim in the same way as we talk to a Sufi Muslim. I mean, they have different needs. They express Islam in a different way, which means also our response and our way of communicating the gospel to them will be different, has to be different, because they are different people. And so so it's as important for us to try to understand what kind of Muslims are we dealing with before we actually know how to actually reach out to them. And just saying, well, I have one method that fits all, it doesn't work. Islam is really growing into more and more diversity within Europe as it is. which helps to me to help people overcome what I believe is one of the biggest obstacles in reaching out to Muslims in Europe is their Islamophobia among Christians. So I've developed a course that helps Christians to overcome this attitude. It's given the name Sharing Lives because it's based on the verse in Thessalonians saying, we loved you so much, so we were willing to not just share the gospel with you, but our lives as well, because you have become so dear to us. Sharing the gospel is in a sense easy, but sharing lives is not so easy. And this is really the emphasis. I encourage Christians, sharing lives with Muslims that God has placed in your countries, in your cities, in your towns, in your schools, or whatever. The course has 5 lessons. It's been taken every 2 weeks, basically. Bible studies, PowerPoints, homework, course book. First lesson talks about our view of Islam, looking at our own attitude, our own hearts. Is there something that I need to change of? Is there something I need to repent of before I start calling others to repentance? Is my attitude right? Am I limited by fear, or do I need to repent? So that's the first. The second lesson has to do with, okay, grace. What does the word grace mean for me personally as a Christian? But how can I then extend this to Muslims that I'm meeting with? What does it actually mean to show them grace? Third lesson is an overview of what Muslims believe and how they express their faith. The fourth one is a visit to a mosque. And the fifth one is practical ideas how to relate to Muslims on a daily basis and what to do once you have contact with them. It's written, actually this course is written with one purpose in mind, to have a Christian, any Christian around Europe, from taking that person from a fearful attitude of, oh, okay, what are they going to do to me, to us, to our country, to proactively help him or her to go out to search for one Muslim friend. One, I mean, more than one is also possible, of course. But my vision, my dream, my desire is that every Muslim in Europe will have one Christian friend. So that will take a little bit of work. But it needs to, because through those relationships, we will actually begin to see who they are, and they will begin to see who we are, and it allows us to share the gospel with them as well.